I don't call them the mainstream media anymore. I call them state-controlled media. They are no different. The only difference between them and TASS and Pravda in the old Soviet Union is that the Soviet citizens were astute enough, unlike most Americans, to realize they were being lied to and that this was state-controlled media. That's the only difference.
Before we begin, just a quick thank you to this interview's sponsor, the Patriot Solar Bank. When you take a look at the riots occurring in Hong Kong and you consider all of the power grid problems in California, it's easy to see why it's important to have your own portable power bank for your phone and electronics. Never waste money on batteries again because it's solar powered. And with a dual USB port, you can charge 2 devices at once. You can charge your cell phone anywhere in the world with the Patriot Solar Bank. It's lightweight, extremely durable, compact, and easy to take with you anywhere you go. Features include solar-powered recharging, dual USB ports, 8,000 mAh battery, LED lamp illumination, USB cable, and detachable compass. The Patriot Solar Bank is the perfect gift for you and your family this Christmas. And guess what? Special Christmas savings right now on these remaining solar banks, 25% off. Use code SGT25 to save 25%. Visit patriotsolarbank.com. The link is below this interview. Okay, friends, welcome back. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's Sean from SGT Report. I really do want to thank you one and all for finding us on YouTube. My latest statistics, boy, they're giving me a hard time in December. November was a better month, and now here in December, it looks like I'm being funneled down again by their algorithms. I know I sound like a broken record, guys. If you want to find me directly, if you want to see my latest 3 videos, they're always sticky at the very top of SGT Report. So thanks so very much for tuning in. And with that said, let's begin with our guest and friend, Donald Jeffries. His book, Hidden History, an expose of modern crimes, conspiracies, and cover-ups in American politics is a must-read. And it's such a small world because the foreword was written by Roger Stone, who is going to go to prison for non-crimes when people like Peter Strzok, James Comey, John Brennan, Joe Biden, and Hillary Clinton are still free. It just makes my blood boil. How are you, Donald?
Fine, Sean. Thank you. I'm feeling a little weird about that, too, because not only do I have Roger Stone kind of connected to my name, but Rob Dew, as you know, watch it. He wrote a blurb for, he interviewed me on InfoWars back in 2015 and wrote a blurb to the paperback edition of Hidden History. And who knows what's going to be going on with there. Unfortunately, it looks like all the wrong people are being sent to prison. Jerome Corsi may be in danger, and all the deep state criminals remain at large.
Yeah, it's just blood-boiling stuff, and now we have this impeachment charade, this coup. I mean, it really is. I mean, I sent out a Twitter last night, and I agree with President Trump here. History is not going to look kindly on what these evil Democrats have done, and that's the tweet I sent out. They are clearly evil, and I think what they've done is demonstrably evil, and they don't care about the Constitution, but that's what they say they care about. And this whole thing makes my blood boil. And I know that you're not a hardcore conservative by any means. You're a classical liberal. What do you make of this impeachment nonsense? And then I want to play you a soundbite here from Nancy the Witch Pelosi.
Well, it's a wonder. I too heard some of the so-called liberal, and I don't consider them liberals, but the leftist Democrats, authoritarian liberals that were invoking the founders. It's amazing, and the Constitution. And one of the things I've written about, especially in my new book, Crimes and Cover-Ups in American Politics, 1776 to 1963, which has a foreword by Ron Paul. So hopefully he remains free as a great person, but. In that book, I talk over and over again about what the founders intended. And I've said many times that the representatives we have today, I don't think any of them even know what's in the Constitution, certainly don't have a regard for it, and treat it all like, as George W. Bush called it, a piece of paper. So for them to invoke the Constitution under this is absolutely ludicrous. The idea that this, I write for the American Free Press regularly. I've written several articles on this impeachment nonsense and the Ukrainian investigation. The idea that this very nebulous phone call, it's a typical Trump phone call where you're not really sure what he's saying, but there's certainly nothing in it to warrant impeachment. And the notion that they're doing this when 3 prominent Democrats wrote a letter earlier that year to a Ukrainian official directly threatening to withhold aid, because there's no nebulous nature to that at all. And then of course Joe Biden himself is on videotape bragging about getting the Ukrainian prosecutor fired. So the idea that they would go into this aspect of things, that they would go into the Ukraine where they themselves, there's much more damning evidence against them than there is against this one phone call with Trump. But the idea they've wanted to get this guy since before he went in office. And this Trump derangement syndrome is a real thing. They hate his personality, and so many people. There are lots of objectionable aspects of his personality, but you can't impeach someone because you don't like his tweets or you think he's racist or sexist, whatever you think he is. And that's what they're doing. This is not, they're just grasping at any straw. And it does amaze me that they actually went through with it, because it just makes them look completely ridiculous.
Well, let me play this. I was going to play Nancy Pelosi. Let's do that in a second. This is a clip I want to play for you. I retweeted this the other day. The last honest Democrat, this decent man, must watch. Democrat Representative Colin Peterson will vote against impeachment. And boy, you tell me if this isn't lucid and intellectually honest. The last honest Democrat, Colin Peterson.
Well, the biggest problem I have with this is that you had people that have decided they're going to impeach him. And now they spent a year trying to figure out how they can make a case for it. That's backwards. I just don't agree with this. I would say if you did a poll in my district, over half the people in my district think we shouldn't do foreign aid in the first place. Okay? So to convince them that, holding up foreign aid is, a big deal, they want to get rid of it. So, we don't have any first-hand information about what happened on that phone call. It's all second-hand information. The whistleblower was second-hand information. The president has not committed a crime.
Yeah, I'll pause it there. And but this is what we're up against. And meanwhile, Joe Biden is freaking out when he's questioned about the Ukraine, and he likes to point fingers at anybody questioning him about his quid pro in Ukraine, and he'll start hollering at people, calling them Buster and Bud and nobody,
Jack.
There's no evidence, Jack.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just these people are out of their minds, Donald, and boy, that's not a question for you, but I'm ranting here because I think I'm expressing what so many of us are feeling.
Yeah, and the good Democrat there, who reminds me of what Democrats could once be and once were, reminds, and that's one thing I've talked about, is that the notion of looking at this at the big picture here, no matter what Trump said on the phone call, the idea is that any way you look at it, if you're looking at a good guys versus bad guys things, how is he the bad guy for wanting them to look into corruption and may on the part of the Bidens or whoever, and maybe threatening to withhold foreign aid? As the guy said, most Americans, that's one of the first things we ought to do if we came to our common sense, is to stop all foreign aid. Our country is completely crumbling. The American people desperately need aid, and they want to cut there, but they're willing to give aid to Israel and all the other countries. It's crazy. So the idea that he's a bad guy for threatening to withhold aid, and then, as some have pointed out, that he actually ended up giving military aid to the Ukraine that the Obama administration didn't. So it's impossible, because this is all about personality. Trump is everything in this country now. He's the dividing rod, and it's his personality that people. It's not the Mason-Dixon line; it's the Trump line, and everybody is divided around his personality. You either like it or don't like it. And those of us that try to remain kind of nonpartisan about it, as I do. I mean, I criticize Trump quite a bit, but I also praise him when he does something that I like or says something I like. But he's done nothing impeachable. The idea that they're going to impeach this guy, when you go back just in recent years, you could have impeached both Reagan and George H.W. Bush over Iran-Contra and October Surprise. You could have impeached Bill Clinton over many things, first and foremost Waco, where he killed a bunch of Americans, including a bunch of kids, for no reason at all, as Justice Department did. You could have impeached George W. Bush for his weapons of mass destruction lie, and it's not even the 9/11 myth. And then, of course, Obama could have been impeached over not only killing an American citizen with a drone, but bragging about it and then killing his 16-year-old son the next month. All those were not considered impeachable offenses, apparently. But this phone call, where at worst he was threatening to withhold foreign aid, which shouldn't be given to these other countries anyhow, given the condition of our country. This is our politics has gotten to the point now where it's beyond satire.
Yeah, I completely agree. And let me ask you this. You mentioned 9/11. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole specifically, but you mentioned 9/11, the farce of it. And has it ever been more clear to you? Because now, rewind time. Remember after 9/11, when so many of us began to wake up, it took a decade for many of us to really look back at that event and really identify the markers that exposed it as being a false flag. But we all struggled, at least when we tried to communicate that event and that false flag and tried to educate our friends, neighbors, and colleagues about it. We struggled to get our friends, neighbors, and colleagues to understand what we were trying to say because the media was covering up that event. And all of our friends, neighbors, and colleagues would say, if what you're saying is true, the mainstream media would be exposing it. A young, hungry journalist would break it wide open. Has it ever been more obvious now? I think even Democrats must recognize the fact that CNN and MSNBC and the Washington Post and the New York Times, et cetera, ABC News, NBC News, these are cover-up specialists for deep state crimes. So they were never going to tell the American people the truth about 9/11, World Trade Center 7, et cetera, ever. They were never going to do it, just as they continued with this impeachment farce, and they would never, ever show the clip of Joe Biden at the CFR bragging about his quid pro quo. And they let him get away with this grandstanding where he'll point at people and say, there is no evidence, bub. It's just madness. And what I'm trying to extrapolate, what I'm trying to show and illustrate here is that the mainstream media is part of the deep state and they cover up. I think that's just their main job, is covering up for the deep state, Donald.
Absolutely. I don't call them the mainstream media anymore. I call them state-controlled media. They are no different. The only difference between them and TASS and Pravda in the old Soviet Union is that the Soviet citizens were astute enough, unlike most Americans, to realize they were being lied to and that this was state-controlled media. That's the only difference. There is no independent media. They can't tell the truth about anything from the JFK assassination on, any events that have happened in our lifetimes, certainly 9/11 or anything like that. They have a vested interest in all these stories. And unless they're instructed to finally tell the truth or to tell a different narrative, they're going to continue to lie. And the only skepticism they have is towards people like you and I, people that are questioning these things. Then they'll be skeptical and they'll question our motives. And they'll look into us and say, why are you doing it? And we're seeing what this is happening, as you're all too familiar with, what's going on with social media. When recently we had the CEO of YouTube coming on and not only admitting that they were censoring people, but bragging about, we've removed 70% of controversial content. And she admitted that because her employees were starting to get persuaded by it, as anyone would be, with an open mind. But she not only, and she's worth $450 million, by the way, the survival of the richest aspect of it that I always look for, having written a book about that. But when she was questioned by the 60 Minutes, I forget what joke of a so-called journalistic show interviewed her, they had no problem with her saying that. I mean, a real reporter would have said, so you're okay with, you seem to be delighting in the fact that you're removing controversial content. Isn't controversial content what the First Amendment's all about? No one says that. So to expect any of these people, the state-controlled media, to expect any of these so-called journalists to expose a single thing, they can't even expose a used car salesman unless they get the green light to do that. They are gutless cowards, all of them. There's a few that have been better than others, but especially the young ones coming along now, I think a lot of times they're just too ignorant to even know. And you can't, as Mark Twain said a long time ago, it's much easier to fool people than admit them to get them to admit they've been fooled. And I think that's the problem when you mentioned earlier about trying to enlighten people on 9/11 or anything else. People don't want to, first of all, they don't want to admit that you and all the other crazy conspiracy theorists, as they call us, have been right. They don't want to admit that we're right about it, of what we've been saying. So they're not going to admit that, and they're certainly not going to admit they're wrong because they've been so passionate about it, about smearing people and trying to get them fired in some cases. So this is a huge issue, and that's why it's so important to try to keep shows like yours and my little show that I have once a week, and all the others out there that are doing great work. And really, this is the only alternative. I mean, people that are watching this now or listening in, these are the only kind of places you can go to get views. Like I'm not going to be welcome on network television. RT has had me on a few times. Maybe I'll be back there, but nowhere else. And voices like mine and yours are not welcome in the mainstream media. So we have to go to the American Free Press that I write for, SGT Report, and so many other good outlets for alternative news. So if we let the powers that be clamp down on this, the last thing we want is an FCC style internet, where you have the kind of wasteland out there that we see on television, where you have hundreds and hundreds of channels, and yet there's never been one special, not one, not even loose change or anything like that, that has been allowed on any network television network since 9/11. There's no JFK, very few bits of doubt here or there, but not much, almost none. But certainly since 9/11, and obviously any of the incidents after that, Sandy Hook, Boston bombing, anything like that, the more recent ones that are very dubious, there is not only no doubt allowed, but they're using this emotional hammer, especially a Sandy Hook. And I think that's to 9/11 to some extent as well. The politics of emotion, they use this emotion and politics of feeling, so people just, start crying or breaking down. And how do you argue with that? You can't reason with emotion.
Well, I think your points are very good. You made one critical error, though, my friend. You maligned 60 Minutes, which is a authoritative news source, and we must hold them in high regard because they are authoritative news sources, so they
Right.
can be trusted. And it was that Leslie Stahl interview with Susan Wojcicki of YouTube, and Leslie Stahl made it very clear that she's an authoritarian. I mean, that's the punchline. And I continue to say the emperor wears no clothes, and now the American people can see it. As it relates to the Democrats, the deep state, and their Mockingbird mainstream media partners like 60 Minutes. And so it's left to President Donald Trump and you and I to try to take our case to the American people via social media. And of course, they want to shut us down there as well. So let's go to a screen share here. Donald J. Trump 15 hours ago, in reality, they're not after me. They're after you. And I think that is very, very true. They are after the American people. They want to open the borders to endless immigration, and then they want to let those illegal immigrants vote in the elections. Donald J. Trump, December 17th. Trump leads in general election. Joe Biden, 41%, Trump 44%. These are all funny polls anyway. I can't even believe it would be that close between Biden and Trump. Anyway, he's going to beat anyone they run against him. So beware. I think Hillary Clinton will eventually throw her hat back into the ring.
Yeah.
And then they're going to tell us she's the front runner. And now this one, Pelosi feels her phony impeachment hoax is so pathetic she is afraid to present it to the Senate, which can set a date and put this whole scam into default if they refuse to show up. The do-nothings are so bad for our country. And now we'll play that Pelosi clip because this is what he's driving at. Now, see, they can't impeach him because they can't get it through the Senate, so now they're going to stall. And they don't even want there to be a trial in the Senate. And they certainly don't want the Senate to call any witnesses like Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, etc. Here's Nancy Pelosi. And you tell me, this is the best the Democrats have? She's their speaker. She can't even speak.
You run the risk, as some Republicans have said, of looking like you're playing games with impeachment if you hold on to these articles for too long.
I said what I was going to say, Nancy. When we bring the bill, which is, just so you know, there's a bill made in order by the Rules Committee that we can call up at any time in order to send it over to the Senate and to have the provisions in there to pay for the impeachment. And then the next step, the whatever you want to call it, the trial. That is where you put the managers. I was not prepared to put the managers in that bill yet because we don't know the arena that we are in. Frankly, I don't care what the Republicans say. Any other questions? Not on this subject. I've said this is it. I honored Nancy.
What a banana republic. What an absolute banana republic. Have you ever seen anything quite as disgraceful as this? And that's not hyperbole. I'm truly asking you. I think this is an absolute disgrace.
Yeah. Well, I wrote in, I think it was Survival of the Rich, that a whole section called The Best and the Brightest, and I talked about the caliber of our politicians. And certainly it's never been worse than it is now. Nancy Pelosi exemplifies that. I think she's probably about 75, maybe older, I don't know. She's physically looks decent, certainly for her age, but when she talks, you can see it's clearly she's not the best and the brightest as she ever was. And as I understand, she was the daughter of a kind of, perhaps mob-connected mayor of Baltimore. That seems to be how she got her start. And so many of the people that we see that are leaders have these kinds of curious connections, which makes them all the more blackmailable. But if you look at the leaders in both parties, and that's why what makes Trump so different is that he does appear to be disconnected from both parties. Because I don't think he's ever had much support in the Republican Party. There's lots of never-Trumpers there, and it's people like Mitch McConnell, and he can sound just as stupid as Nancy Pelosi is. I've said many times, Sean, that you could get an average group of preschoolers anywhere in this country and put them in charge, and they do a better job. And I firmly believe that. And every time you watch a Nancy Pelosi type speak or an Adam Schiff or any of these people are horrible. And that's, because obviously the preschoolers wouldn't be as corrupt at that level. The corruption there beyond the what we have now is just such a mesh of corruption and incompetence. I write about history. And the eras that I write about, the corruption was always there. 50 years ago, there was tons of corruption. Everybody was corrupt, but there was a general competence behind it all. There was also an era of civility. And regardless of what you think of Richard Nixon or people like that, you can't envision him getting up in somebody's face like Joe Biden did and calling him Jack, or getting down to that kind of level. Michael Moore recently seriously suggested that Pierre Trudeau, what's Trudeau's boy?
Justin
Trudeau. That he
the
and
dancing fool, Justin Trudeau, the dancing fool.
Yeah, that Trudeau and Trump get in the ring and have a fight. And to my shock, I discovered that Trudeau had already had some kind of boxing match with one of his conservative opponents in Canada. This is the level we're at now. Where as I've said, what would that prove? Regardless, that's the epitome of the might makes right argument. But that's where we're at, this idiocracy level. And with the election of Trump, this has become more and more clear, because the idiocracy, Trump's greatest, I think, accomplishment has been bringing the roaches out of the shadows. People knew, people like us knew what kind of people Nancy Pelosi and others were of that ilk, but it's now for everyone to see, because they've completely lost their composure. And if Trump is reelected, I'm not sure. The reaction last time was so bad, and with everything vested in trying to remove him at all costs, I can't imagine what the reaction will be. Certainly, we must watch TV on CNN if he wins election night.
Let me ask you something, because I've struggled with this for so long, and it seems to only be getting worse. So you mentioned Michael Moore, you mentioned Justin Trudeau, and I've played that famous clip of Justin Trudeau upon being sworn in, pledging his allegiance to the Queen and the Privy Council and promising to keep secret anything shared between the Queen and he in the Privy Council, etc. We all understand the power of the Queen and the colonization of, come on, we all understand it. Michael Moore must certainly understand that. So must people like Robert De Niro and all of the people, and maybe they don't understand the fact that there's a deep state, right? We have John McLaughlin, the former head of the CIA, saying, thank God for the deep state as it relates to trying to topple Trump.
The intelligence community, it feeds the president's concern and often used term about a deep state being there to take him out.
Thank God for the deep state.
And my question to you is this: are these people brainwashed, or are they willing pawns in this endgame, which could be the total destruction of this country, and actually literally throwing people like you and I and those that, well, I'm not saying you necessarily are a Trump fan, but throwing conservatives, anybody that opposes their globalist view, into concentration camps? Because that's what Larry Grathwohl said they wanted to do when he infiltrated the Weather Underground. Bill Ayers, connected to Obama, Bill Ayers used to be in the Weather Underground, and they said they wanted a communist takeover of the United States. And by their estimate, 20 to 30 million Americans would have to be put in concentration camps, re-education camps. And those that couldn't be re-educated to the new ways of thinking, the communist ways, would have to be exterminated. Now, this is not hyperbole. Again, this is not conjecture. This is really scary stuff. And when the mainstream media and people like Michael Moore continue to cover up for the diabolical plans of the deep state, one's left to wonder, how far away could we be from a possibility that they would actually try to do that if, say, for instance, Hillary Clinton got back into the Oval Office? What does history tell us about the possibilities here?
Well, I think that's the direction we've been heading for a long time. And I've said many times, I don't know why they haven't just come right out and taken the mask off, because this is clearly what they believe. And in their unguarded moments, they do. I mean, whether the eugenicists talking about, millions, if not billions of people have to die, which they've all said many times, including members of the royal family, or they're just making these hate speech and hate crimes laws. When you have, I'm as a civil libertarian and really someone who should be on the left, I end up fighting with the left all the time. I'm not welcome there, because I believe that free speech means nothing if you don't protect the speech of those you disagree with. We all can like what people say that we agree with. Who doesn't? It's very much like the Christian admonition to love your enemy. Who does that? Everybody can love somebody who agrees with you. It's very easy to do that. But the idea of free speech is that you have to protect all speech, including that you really violently disagree with. And hate speech, the fact that this term is bandied about by everyone on the left now. I don't know that anyone except me that has any kind of public platform that constantly points it out, that hate is in the eye of the beholder. And this term hate speech is as close as you can get to the concept of the thought crime, because that's basically what it is. And you can't have free speech with hate speech. So, but you people, when you talk about Michael Moore or any of these leading Democratic politicians, with the possible exception, Tulsi Gabbard has some good qualities, and the people like Dennis Kucinich and Cynthia McKinney, who used to be in Congress, aren't there anymore. They had some civil libertarian instincts, and they were part of the left where I am, the populist left, that wants the poor Americans to be helped, that looks at the awful nature of homeless everywhere, and the tents in the streets and the defecation in the street. The left is all okay with that now. If you criticize that, they will call you racist or something because most of the people doing that and are homeless in the streets of California and elsewhere are non-white or maybe illegal immigrants. So you're a hater if you point it out, even though your country is being destroyed, literally. I mean, Sean, I can't imagine even 10 years ago, let alone 20, 30 years ago, to think that the largest state, some of the biggest cities, San Francisco, one of the richest areas in the world, has people defecating right outside of expensive restaurants. And I don't know if you saw the picture the other day of some guy crapping in a grocery store in an aisle. This is happening, and I don't understand it. It's like political correctness is now on steroids, where we can't find a way to stop that. I mean, you don't have to throw somebody in jail for doing that, but you need to use some of the empty buildings. There's solutions out there that you could use as contrived homeless shelters. You could certainly have porta potties or something out there for people to use. And then if they still did that, then you would have to take them in on some kind of charge. But it's really a situation that it's so third. We talked about Banana Republic. America is becoming so third world in the way, and I call it America 2.0 now. And I lived most of my life in America 1.0. Maybe some people out there today, because basically I think America 2.0 was born pretty much after 9/11 with the Patriot Act and the free speech zones and all these hate speech laws and so forth that are just eroding what's left of our civil liberties. And the idea that we can't, until Trump came along and actually pointed out several of the giant elephants and naked emperors that you were talking about earlier that are roaming all over this crumbling country, and talked about the infrastructure, which we haven't addressed in 60 years, and we still don't seem willing to do it. And now we've got an infrastructure that in many cases in our large cities features crap on the streets and homeless living on the streets, tent cities, just a real third world look. So whether it's Trump or anyone else, it's a monumental task to try to clean this up. And I don't know when Americans are going to reach the tipping point, but again, they've been distracted now by Trump's personality, and all they are, if the people that hate him think that somehow if they get rid of them, their lives are going to be better. I've tried to reason with people like that. What do you think, just if I don't have to read his tweets anymore, how's that going to improve your life? Or you don't get to read Trump's tweets anymore. But that's the level we're at now. People are arguing over that. And so these big issues, the fact that half of Americans make less than $27,000 a year, and that millions are flooding across our border that are poorer than anyone in this country now and are adding to the poor, that just escapes them. They don't care about that because they are so fixated on the politics of emotion and now Trump's personality that you can't distract them at all with really important issues that go to the heart of whether America is going to survive. And at this point, I think the collapse in it is inevitable if we don't make some of many of the reforms Trump talked about in his campaign, and more than that, beyond that. But you at least have to build the infrastructure. You have to do something about this economy to bring some of the businesses back and stop the outsourcing, stop the layoffs. But the globalization that Trump called out, we have to stop this if we want to be a sovereign nation.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. And I don't think that most of the people on the left have ever heard of United Nations Agenda 2030.
No.
Right? I don't think they have the first clue that what will happen, because the Democrats espouse all of this climate change stuff and doing something about climate change and the Paris Accord, et cetera, et cetera. Nancy Pelosi really going AWOL, saying, oh, we're still in it when she went to Spain.
Yeah.
We're still in, right? Usurping what the president has said. These people, and I'm talking about the brainwashed lefties, don't understand what real serfdom is. Because what the Democrats and what the United Nations want to roll out with UN Agenda 2030 is 17th century living standards.
Yes.
No
yes.
more oil, no more gas, no more natural gas, no more coal, nothing. You look at New York City and you tell me how a city like that operates on wind and solar. It won't, and that's the plan. And if we don't wake up these lefties to this diabolical climate change plan, it literally will be game over. You talk about trying to revitalize the economy and ending globalism, UN Agenda 2030 will deliver this country right into the soft, open, willing, waiting hands of the bureaucrats in Brussels, the one world government. They will cripple this country and bring us to our knees in the name of saving the planet if we let them get away with it. And here's the one piece of good news. I was doing a screen share while you were talking. Uprising in Virginia as that criminal governor tries to come after the guns. The sheriffs, 90% of Virginia counties are now gun sanctuaries, and the sheriffs will not cooperate. The sheriffs will not come after the guns there. And that's what needs to happen when these lefty bureaucrat globalists overreach and they come after the guns. The sheriffs and the police need to stand with the people for the Second Amendment, shall not be infringed. That is the line in the sand, and that is the one remaining thing that will keep this country free. Because when I mention Larry Grathwohl, and I mention the Weather Underground and their plan to usher in communism and enslave anybody who doesn't get on board with the communist plan, I want people to understand, based on history, in your book, you talk about Wilson imprisoning people, protesters of World War I. World War II, Japanese people being interned in concentration camps. This can happen. And what scares me about the left, look at Antifa. Look at the seething, insane left after Trump won. These people are out of their minds and unhinged. And it would not take much to rally them to support interning those of us that oppose their globalist views. Do you think that is actually possible based on just a couple of those cases of history I just mentioned?
Well, if enough of the wrong people get in power, absolutely. President Adam Schiff or someone like that, I certainly have no doubt that they would be locking up people left and right, because that's part of the authoritarianism. You mentioned climate change. That's one of the few concrete issues today's left will discuss. And they want to call you a climate change denier if you question it. But I've pointed out it's one of the real genuine radicals that's out there that's honest, that it's my friend Cindy Sheehan, the international peace activist. She's at war with the left all the time. And she pointed out, why doesn't Greta Thunberg or any of the other climate change activists talk about all the damage inflicted on the environment by the military? All our escapades in other countries, it's never mentioned. And she doesn't talk about what I wrote about in Hidden History about the disgraceful Gulf oil spill and the cleanup, which was even worse. She doesn't, because she would have to call out a big oil company then. It's all about, as you mentioned, lowering our standards of living. They also never call out India or China, two of the biggest polluters on earth. It's all about you, Mr. and Mrs. Average American. They want you to lower your standards of living. I wrote all about this in Survival of the Richest, the new normal. They would like to have us eventually living in little bunk bed cubicles, as is common in China now. No more single family homes, no more personal property. They don't want that. They don't want the American dream anymore that built this country, the middle class, which is being squeezed out of existence. And unfortunately, this is where the left is at. And there's nobody on the left except me from the little platform I have that I know of that is mentioning these kind of Huey Long populist issues. Everything is authoritarian. That's why when you talk about the possibility of locking people up, it's already been broached. I mean, they've leftists that have talked about locking up climate change deniers. You're already getting people fired from their jobs for what they tweeted. Regardless of what you think, again, it's a free speech issue. Oh my God, you're going to let hate. And the fact that's why I hate it when I hate it. See, I'm using hate. Hate's a human emotion. When Trump uses their language and talks about hate crimes and hate speech, that's giving in to the enemy, because that coded word hate is used to hit people over the head with. It's an emotional term, and it's a human emotion we all have, and they clearly hate more than most people do because they hate the so-called haters. But we have to get away from that and to try to confront them on these kind of rational fronts where there's no defense for that. As I've said many times, what is the defense, whether it's online censorship or just free speech in general? There's no argument against it. All you can do is come up with absurd and meaningless terms like hate speech. What does that mean? Who determines what hate is? Hate, the same thing with a hate crime. What's a hate crime? All crime involves some degree of hate, I would imagine. But this all, again, it's part of the world we've allowed to be built, and that authoritarian left has completely taken over the left wing, where, one time you had people like the great Smedley Butler that I write about so much in the new book, and Huey Long, and on to the John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy, up through Dennis Kucinich and Cynthia McKinney. There were always good people out there on the left, and that's why I was a Democrat. I was raised a Democrat. And I guess I did the walk away thing a long time, back in the 80s. I walked away from them and became an independent because I recognized at that time that this was, I call them the Republicrats. And until Trump came along, that held true. But Trump really is kind of a force unto himself, regardless of what you think about him. He's not a Republican. I'm not sure what he is, but he is an independent in some to some degree. And I think the important thing to consider politically is what happens after Trump. Because at this point, whether he has the desire or aggressiveness to try to accomplish what he promised, or he's obviously going to be prevented from it if he does attempt to do that by all the powers that be. Every pillar of the establishment is dead set against all his really strong campaign rhetoric about building the infrastructure, auditing the Fed, bringing all the troops home, certainly controlling immigration. What happens after Trump? And that's where it's important for us not to get so distracted by personality, because Trump is in his 70s. So something conceivably could happen to him. And of course, we would all suspect that, it was foul play, and it probably would be if that happened. But we have to look at what happens after him, because certainly Mike Pence is not like Trump. And he's a typical neocon conservative, and things would go right back to kind of George W. Bush normal.
Yeah, so is Mitt Romney. Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Look, what happens after Trump is not good unless we get somebody like Rand Paul in there, or maybe one of Trump's kids. But here's the thing, on this climate change thing, I just want people to know, and I know our listeners know it, but I'm hoping new people will listen to this. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is the United Nations body for assessing the science related to climate change. UN Agenda 2030 is the plan to make you and your family and your offspring live like serfs, because innovating to zero carbon emissions by 2050 with no new forms of energy means we will live like serfs in the 17th century. People have to understand that. And so after Trump comes the conspiracy, because that's what this thing is. We can see the conspiracy in the wide open to execute a coup against President Trump. That's now in the wide open. Anybody paying attention can see that. And there's also a conspiracy to enslave this nation to UN Agenda 2030 climate change policies, because the IPCC itself was caught fudging the data. They showed us the hockey stick data, or at least Al Gore did. He's been on board. This whole plan has been unfolding for decades. And yet decades go by and none of their fear-mongering comes true. The IPCC gets caught fudging the data, trying to show that the planet's heating faster than it actually is. And just like Joe Biden's admission to the CFR of his quid pro quo to withhold $1 billion from Ukraine if they didn't fire the prosecutor who was investigating his son, the media ignores that, just like the media ignores the IPCC fudging the data on climate change, right? So we're all just supposed to fall in line and listen to these authoritative sources who continually lie to us quantifiably day after day after day after day. So to me, what comes after Trump is more of this conspiracy, because that's what it is. The deep state, Mockingbird, mainstream media conspiracy to destroy this country. Am I off base? Because to me, it seems like that's the real conspiracy. They call us conspiracy theorists. I am demonstrating what the actual conspiracy is, folks.
Well, it is, and everything you're describing, I described in detail in my book, Survival of the Richest, which the subtitle was The Greatest Conspiracy of All. And that is, and it's the, when I talk about the climate change, it would be one thing if the activists were, again, pointing out the military, pointing out China and India, pointing out the big corporations that could pollute more in a week than all of us combined can in a lifetime. But none of their rhetoric is directed at any of those powerful places. It's all directed at average people. They don't want you to have a hot bath. They don't want you to drive an SUV. They want you to give up every little bit of creature comfort that you have, even though 70+% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. Don't have a lot of creature comforts, but maybe they look forward to a hot shower. They want you to get used to that. That's the rhetoric that I can't stand, because it does preach a diminished standard of living, and that's absolutely should be unacceptable to Americans. But unfortunately, in the age of, and when we talk about what comes after Trump, I don't think we can ever have business as usual again, because substantial people, your audience, I'm sure, people like us, everybody that voted for Trump, that was persuaded by him, all of that, they've whet the appetite now. If nothing gets done, and especially if the deep state wins and is able to remove Trump from office, that, I'm not sure anything would create a revolution in this country, because Americans are so apathetic, and they rightfully fear this huge government that we've created that could come right down on us. But they've really got an appetite out there for the 30, 40%, whatever the amount of people is that are really in this boat, that realize that the deep state is completely corrupt, and we're drawn to Trump in varying degrees. All those people out there are going to be searching for something like him. And there's nothing out there like Trump that's going to give them the rhetoric, or even the rhetoric, let alone actions. It's not going to happen. You mentioned Mitt Romney, and there's several Bushes on the horizon. There's nobody in the Republican Party. John Kasich, Marco Rubio. These are horrific people. Nobody would, in their right mind, that would voted for Trump, and they all were never Trumpers, virtually every one of them. So there's nobody on the Democratic side. So maybe that opens the door for an independent political movement. I don't know, but certainly they've got people, ready. They've readied them for something, some kind of reform, and we're not seeing it. And in fact, I think what you're seeing, the main reason that all the powers that be are objecting so much to Trump, is because of the absolute fear. They fear some of these changes. They're the reason they defend the deep state, whether it's journalists or politicians, because the deep state has been very good to them. They make lots of money. Their children's futures are secured. They have no fear of anything. They're living a great life. So, you can almost understand, it's kind of like selling your soul out, but you can kind of understand why they would be loyal to this corruption, because it's done well by them.
I don't, though. And I know, look, I get your argument. This is where I struggle. And I think people with a Christian ideology struggle, because what does it benefit a man to inherit the whole world,
right,
only to lose his soul? Like, literally, I don't know how they sleep at night. I've said it time and time again. $12 million a year, Anderson Cooper. I don't care. I don't care. What are you going to do with $12 million a year? You're going to buy an awesome house and live on the ocean in a great, seaside estate. Great. That's it. You still have to get up in the morning. You still have to go to bed at night, and you're still going to have to look God. You're still going to have to look God in the eye when you meet your maker. I just don't get it. Selling out humanity, selling out this country specifically for dollar bills. Well, look, Judas sold out Jesus for what? 12 pieces? How many pieces of silver?
12 pieces. Yeah, I think it was 12 pieces of silver. Yeah. But I think that a lot of the people, or maybe most of the people we're talking about, maybe some of them have sincere religious beliefs, and they've managed to somehow reconcile this kind of social justice warrior, where they think they're doing good with sanctuary cities and so forth. But I think the vast majority of the people in power, whether they make a show of a pretense of going to church or whatever, I don't think they have any real faith, and I don't think they're serving God or Jesus Christ. Maybe I'm, pretentious in saying that, but that's the way I look at it. I find it hard to believe, as you said. I don't know how they could look themselves in the face if they don't have these deep. You and I may have these beliefs and this faith, but most of the people running this country don't have that. And when you get into the darker aspects, when you go further down the rabbit hole and you start looking at the child sex trafficking rings and all these indications of perhaps cannibalism, crazy stuff that's out there, that these people, spirit cooking and these kind of things that they may be involved with. If that's the case, they're certainly not going to be worrying about God, because they're not serving you. They're serving someone else, obviously, and they have literally perhaps sold their soul. So, and they're taking what rewards they can get on Earth, whether it's $12.5 million a year or whatever.
Right.
But I don't know what promises are made beyond that. But I think that's the problem, is that it's maybe going to be very hard to reason with people like that aren't on the same kind of plane as us, who don't care about right and wrong, who don't have empathy, who don't have a conscience. As John F. Kennedy said in his greatest speech at American University, he talked about, our only sure reward is a good conscience. And I don't think a lot of people today have that. Their conscience doesn't bother them. And every one of our leaders, you're right, I don't know how they can sleep at night, because everything they do should make them feel nothing but guilt. And they don't appear to have that. Instead, they appear to be smiling and walking and very happy with their lives.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they've been deceived. And I guess that's the devil's greatest trick on these people, is that deception works on them, evidently. I don't know. I mean, all we can do is have these conversations and try to expose the real conspiracy, which is to topple this country and take the guns and usher in UN Agenda 2030 policies. Guys, as we wrap this up, I want to show you that at SGT Report, at the very top of the page, are always my latest 3 videos. So they're right there in that video bar. And I want to scroll down and show you this piece of news. U.S. government claims footage of Jeffrey Epstein's first suicide attempt has gone missing, and they just can't explain it. It's vanished. They can't find it. So it's just more of the same. The good news is our friend Donald Jeffries is working on a new book called Bullyocracy. Do I have that title right?
Yes, Bullyocracy. How
All right.
the social hierarchy enables bullies, workplaces, how it enables bullies to rule schools, workplaces, and society at large. It'll be out in January.
Yeah, and bullies in the U.S. government, like Adam Schiff and Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden, and they're just literal bullies, because I'm not sure how they've gotten away with this. I mean, I guess because they have a willing media that's helped them get away with this, but what they've done to this president with these 2 fabled, concocted, non-backed articles of impeachment, which aren't even specific and don't actually name any specific crimes that he's committed, when Joe Biden himself is on tape bragging about doing far worse in the Ukraine for his own personal benefit and the benefit of his son. It's just beyond the pale. But the good news is people are waking up in droves, and Adam Schiff is catching hell at his own town halls, and so are many of the other Democrats. So we'll keep an eye on this story, and tell people where they can find you on YouTube, Donald.
Well, I'm under my name, Donald Jeffries. I need YouTube subscribers, so please, I have a weekly radio show, I Protest. I'm hoping to have Dan Badani on tomorrow, who was mentioned, as you know, in those videos we're watching of the testimony of Paul Joseph Watson and Rob Dew. They seem to be kind of trying to finger him and blame him, so hopefully he'll be able to talk about that. I don't know if legally he can or not, but that's I Protest on Truth Frequency Radio, which is part of the iHeartRadio network, Fridays from 5 to 7 p.m. My blog is donaldjeffries.wordpress.com, and right now my book that is out, is still new, is Crimes and Cover-Ups in American Politics, 1776-1963, The History They Didn't Teach in School, forward by Ron Paul. It's doing really well. And Bullyocracy, as you know, I'll be promoting that down the road, is out in next month in January. So there's a lot of things going on, and I'm always active writing and talking on great shows like yours.
Yeah, well, we appreciate you and your voice. So thank you for coming on today, Don.
Thanks for having me, Sean. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, pleasure's all mine. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. If you like this and it resonates with you, please do give it a like and share it within your sphere of influence on social media, because YouTube is no longer recommending my content. I mean, that's evident by the analytics, which continue to go down, especially now here in December again. So, and a special thanks to my patrons for helping me stay in the fight for truth and real news. We really value and love you guys. Thanks so much. And for Real News 24/7, visit us directly at sgtreport.com, the antidote to corporate propaganda. God bless, guys. Bye-bye.
They wouldn't be able to control if everybody stood up against mandatory vaccinations, or if everybody stood up against the injustices. And they're our elected officials, and they're acting on their own accord.